Good morning on the East Coast of the United States. Good afternoon in Ukraine and elsewhere in Europe. My name is John Herbst, and I run the Eurasia Center at the Atlantic Council. We have a wonderful event for you today, which the Eurasia Center is putting on with our colleagues at the Global Energy Center and at the GeoEconomics Center. In fact, they deserve the lion's share of the credit for everything that happens today. My job is to introduce Jeff Pyatt, who is the Assistant Secretary for Energy Resources at the State Department. I first met Jeff maybe 4 or 3 months before he went to Kiev as ambassador, and he had an extraordinarily difficult task to do there because he was there for the Maidan revolution, and then the start of Moscow's war on Ukraine in 2014, and he handled that so magnificently that they sent him to Greece, where he in fact supercharged a complex relationship, truly historic work for an ambassador both in Kiev and in Athens. So I will turn this over to Jeff because you don't need to hear me anymore. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you very much to the Atlantic Council for having me, but especially to Ambassador Herbst for that very kind introduction. I'm really delighted to be here to join for the launch of the Atlantic Council's report on reconstructing Ukraine at war, acting now to forge the European economic prosperity of tomorrow. This event and the Atlantic Council report could not be better timed as I and many others from the Biden administration head to Berlin this weekend to participate in the Ukraine Recovery Conference. In Berlin, I will meet with government officials from Ukraine, from Europe, the broader donor community, as well as many private sector and civil society members, both American companies, but also Ukrainians. We will gather in Berlin to tackle this very question. How can we help Ukraine to win this war and to rebuild stronger and more vibrant than ever before? Today's discussion comes amid a dramatic escalation of Russian attacks since March 22nd on Ukraine's energy infrastructure, with extraordinary costs and damage to Ukraine's economy, infrastructure, and most of all, its people. These attacks, including another wave of Iranian Shahed and ballistic missiles last night, have targeted the electricity grid, power generation, and natural gas infrastructure. As a result, Ukraine's energy system is in an extremely fragile state, as the Financial Times, New York Times, and Washington Post have detailed in stories over the past day or two. The consequences of Russia's escalated attacks on Ukraine's energy infrastructure fall hardest, of course, on Ukraine's people. Disrupting reliable electricity access impacts lives and livelihoods, since Ukraine's energy system is essential to continued operations of all sectors of the economy, including heating, transportation, and importantly, industry. We all want to recognize the heroic work, perseverance, and ingenuity of the Ukrainian people throughout the past 2.5 years. But I especially want to recognize Ukraine's extraordinary energy workers who have managed to stabilize the system through the tireless efforts utilizing Ukraine's own power network, sometimes at great personal peril. The United States, I want to be clear, remains absolutely committed to supporting Ukraine and the Ukrainian people in their fight for survival. And now is the time for us also to act to ensure Ukraine's vibrant economic future as part of the European Union. We, Ukraine, the United States, all of our international partners, must act now to repair and rebuild Ukraine's energy sector and to make it sustainable, more decentralized, modernized, and fully aligned with European standards. To aid towards this goal, I lead the G7+ Energy Coordination Group, which includes our G7, European, and multilateral partners. The G7+ coordinates government assistance efforts and works with the private sector to ensure the continued reliability and resilience of Ukraine's energy systems. In Berlin, I will co-chair with our German URC hosts the next G7 Plus Energy Coordination Group meeting, where we will focus on marshaling international assistance to Ukraine's energy sector following Russia's brutal recent round of attacks on generation capacity. Through this group, the United States leads the response to Ukraine's urgent repair needs and works with donors to get priority equipment to Ukraine as fast as humanly possible. Currently, our priorities are to repair existing power generation before the winter, to help deploy new distributed power generation, and to repair and defend Ukraine's electricity grid. Since February 2022, the United States has allocated over $1 billion to address Ukraine's energy sector needs, sending equipment to repair damage to the electricity grid, provide backup power generation, install warming shelters, and restore district heating systems. I assure you there will be more that we will announce in Berlin. The United States energy sector assistance is not just focused on rebuilding after damage from Russian attacks, but building back a Ukraine energy system that is better than ever. Our assistance supports the decentralization of Ukraine's energy grid, creating an inherently more secure energy system. It ensures the effectiveness of transparency and anti-monopoly measures in the energy sector, designed to align that sector with the requirements of EU membership. And it creates the basis for a cleaner, greener, and more distributed system connected to the European energy market. Together, through our G7 Plus group, we've channeled more than 100,000 tons of energy equipment to Ukraine since the beginning of Russia's targeting of the energy system in October of 2022. The most recent wave of attacks has once again laid bare the many challenges Ukraine faces for reconstruction in the energy sector and the broader economic front. Ukraine's energy sector was a linchpin of the economy before the full-scale invasion. It is indispensable to sustaining Ukraine through the war, and it will be key to Ukraine's post-war economic future. The energy sector will drive restoration and economic revitalization across Ukraine's entire economy, from agriculture to transportation, heating, IT, housing, and crucially, industrial and metals sectors. Russia's actions and its weaponization of its energy resources have exposed its unreliability as an energy supplier. As Europe turns away from Russian energy and looks to more reliable sources of power, Russia will find very limited opportunities for securing new markets. Our sanctions regime is designed specifically to thwart Russia's future energy economy, and that project is working, as reflected in recent announcements from Gazprom about the long road that they face to any form of recovery. Against this backdrop, and as Central and Eastern European economies continue to grow but outpace their energy supply, Ukraine is poised to become an exporter of clean energy towards the West, to become Europe's power bank. Ukraine also has a robust tradition of manufacturing and can play a key role in our global clean energy supply chains, which are complex and need to expand quickly to meet the increasing demands of global energy transition. Ukraine's advanced nuclear sector, its expansive geography for renewables, and potential to increase industrial manufacturing and critical minerals processing make Ukraine an obvious critical component of Europe's future energy security. Ukraine should also become a center for producing the components of the energy transition: wind turbines, cables, pipes, all the critical energy infrastructure inputs for which global supply chains are currently constrained, for which cities like Kharkiv and Dnipropetrovsk have long been traditional manufacturing centers. The Ukrainian government has set out an ambitious vision for the future of its energy system, and we have seen excellent cooperation from their side in pursuit of this vision. However, Governments will not achieve this ambitious vision alone. We need the private sector and civil society in Ukraine, in Europe, and internationally. Current damage assessments put the cost of repairs to Ukraine's energy sector at billions of dollars. We've received a very strong commitment from our private sector that they want to help Ukraine to realize its vision for a future energy system that is resilient, clean, affordable, and fully integrated with the European Union. But to accomplish this, Ukraine is going to have to ensure an open, attractive, and transparent investment environment, fully aligned with European competition standards. To get there, the United States is working closely with the Ukrainian government, along with partners and allies, to advance energy sector reforms, to attract foreign direct investment, and to accelerate the development of distributed energy projects. Ukraine has made tremendous progress on reforms and corporate governance since the days when Ambassador Herbst and I served at the embassy. This is particularly the case in the energy sector. But we're going to continue to work with the government to promote further progress on implementing needed reforms and to support the modernization of Ukraine's energy grid. I commend the Ukrainian government for its commitment to this important work and its strategic focus on how we can best work together to achieve these goals. The United States is going to continue to support Ukraine through this conflict, a message that I know President Biden will reinforce today as he marks D-Day on the beaches of Normandy. Working together, we're going to ensure that Ukraine becomes a beacon for the clean energy transition in Europe and beyond. Thank you very much, and I look forward to this morning's discussions.
Well, thank you very much, Ambassador Pyatt. We're very grateful that you found time in your, no doubt, very busy schedule ahead of the Berlin conference to come to see us, to make those remarks about what the United States is doing with its allies to help Ukraine. A big energy focus, of course, given Russia's new pernicious focus on energy assets in Ukraine. We're now moving on to the panel discussion of our event. We're obviously marking the launch of the Atlantic Council's report on reconstruction. Given the busy schedule of our panelists, we'll probably talk about what's actually in the report a bit later in this event with my co-author, Olga Kakova of the Global Energy Center. But first, I think we'll go to our panelists. If we could see them here. Wonderful. One more may be joining us in a few minutes, but first I'd like to introduce Olga Zykova, the Deputy Finance Minister of Ukraine. Also, might I add, a Millennium Fellow with the Atlantic Council. We're very happy to have you here. Thank you, Olga. A second Millennium Fellow with the Atlantic Council, Denis Yatsishin, who's also the head of the US-Ukraine Business Council, and Edward Verona, who's a Senior Fellow with us at the Eurasia Centers. So thank you, all of you, for joining. And if I could go to you first, Olga, as you prepare for the Berlin conference, I was wondering if you could briefly give us an assessment of the current financial situation in Ukraine, the questions your ministry is dealing with. When the other Olga Hakova, and I were visiting you in February, Ukraine was facing quite a few cash flow issues due to the deferring of the US supplemental. I believe things are slightly better, but let's not sugarcoat them either. So if you could update us, I'd be very grateful. Thank you. And I think you're on mute.
Sorry. Thank you. I'm absolutely thrilled to be here today with you. And actually, the topic is just on spot. And we need to understand where we are and what we are planning ahead. One might question how Ukraine appeared in the situation of fully covered macroeconomic, macrofinancial stability with inflation of 3.2% and all social expenditures covered, while also pleading for additional external funding and military equipment to come. This is something that we walked through during Q1 of this year, when, as you rightly said, there was a big question mark with regards to when the US funding might come. We also had quite a big gap in terms of military supply, and it had a direct impact towards widening the fiscal gap. So this year opened a new reality for us as the fiscal team. actually due to the fact that the amount of the equipment coming was quite restricted or was not coming at all, we had to introduce particular measures on fiscal side so that to keep the military campaign afloat. It costs us approximately $5 billion for Q1. We introduced such measures as windfall tax on banks' profits. We front-loaded dividends from biggest SOEs. We were increasing internal domestic debt market borrowings. With all this, we could accumulate additional financing to actually smoothly walk through Q1, but all these measures have limited effect. And this is why we were quite concerned with the time, which is of critical importance for us to receive the necessary funding for us to proceed on all fronts, on fiscal front, on military front. And with this, I must say that the way how the war evolves made us make different choices and steps ahead. The matter is that the enemy itself is increasing its defense budget. And the energy terror, which we witnessed during Q1, actually had the cause we had to revise the GDP growth from 4.6% to 3.5% this year, mainly due to the damages done for the energy sector. They are huge. We lost almost all thermal power generation capacity. And the price of that terror is also the loss of 8 gigawatts of power generation capacity. With this, we understand that it becomes top priority for us as the government to first and foremost cover the energy sector and to do quick steps with regards to covering the needs in this sector. But also keeping in mind that the absolute priority is the defense budget, which we cover purely with internal resources. Definitely, the decision by the US going ahead with the support package was critically important for us. And here I must say that already now we understand how the budget might look like by end year. And with this support, together with all the reforms that we are being implemented, we are moving towards the fourth review of the IMF program, which actually anchors not only the reforms, but also the support of the partners for the time period of the program. So with this, at this time point, I must say that it is still critically important to cover the social expenditures. We need to proceed paying pensions, salaries to healthcare workers, salaries to teachers, and we mainly use the external funding for that. But we appeared in the environment where the defense budget increases. Critically wise to understand that the war will not be over by end of 2024, as we all predicted. And to look forward into 2025, we need to envisage at least the same defense budget as for this year. And with this in mind, we need to keep that focus as in parallel, in line with what we need to do in addition to reconstruction efforts. It does not add it adds burden not only towards the budget, but actually towards listing the priorities in due course and having a very clear signals towards the Berlin conference, which we are all approaching. And here the agenda of the government would be to actually outline the reality as it is, how the war impacts all other sectors and how the war impacts the steps that the government has to introduce and walk through. But at the same time, we need to keep the focus of the international partners towards helping us in doing our homework with this regard.
Thank you very much, Olga. We may come back to you in a second, but I'm happy to also introduce Alexei Sobolov, the Deputy Minister of Economy for Digital Development of Ukraine. Thank you for joining us, Alexei. You also have a busy schedule, I'm sure. I think I'll turn the floor to you for a few minutes, if you don't mind. Anything you'd like to pick up on from your colleagues in the Finance Ministry? The Economy Ministry obviously is in control on reform, on guiding the economy, on trying to revitalize certain sectors. How does your work complement that of the Finance Ministry? And obviously, it's very understandable that the priority is the war. But Olga rightly said that you try to do both in parallel. Fight the war, win the war, but also try to repair, reconstruct where possible. So if you could tell us a little bit about your role in this.
Thanks for the invitation, and good to see you all. So I connected later, so I didn't hear for everything that what was saying. But I heard the last part, so I'm traveling to Berlin for the conference. But the main topic that we feel right now is probably the resilience part. So. Like it would be good to rebrand the Ukraine Recovery Conference for Ukraine Resilience Conference, or like Ukraine Defense and Resilience Conference, because this is what we're all looking for. And resilience is not just a term, right? It is very quantifiable. So resilience is in the number of air defense units that we have, in the number of energy units that we're currently building to keep our businesses online, to keep our economy running, in the number of other businesses that invest in Ukraine and the FDI, etc. So I think that's the main theme for like this year, and whatever is needed to make Ukraine more resilient to get through the work and win it, I think would be important, and it drives our own policies. So we also say that Ukraine is not embargo on investment. We see that despite all of that, and despite the news that you might be hearing, last year, for example, FDI was between $4 and $5 billion, which is even more than some of the recent pre-invasion years, which means that businesses are investing. There are a lot of investment, like big investment announcements that should be done at the conference. And so we see that this is happening, that the businesses actually deploy capital. And if you talk to the businesses just months ago, they would say that some of them are earning quite more money than before the invasion. So this is kind of that. And we also see Ukraine Euro integration as a great like vehicle and driver for further additional investments. That we're going to be part of the EU, so that's how like we're going to be part of the single market, the big economy. There's going to be also recovery, a lot of reconstruction, etc. So that's there, and of course one of the vehicles that's important for both the macro situation that the Ministry of Finance is looking after and for growth is the Ukraine plan. So just yesterday, Verkhovna Rada has ratified the framework agreement for launching the Ukraine plan. So it's finally all the procedures are done. It's official. So this is a 50 billion 4-year economic development project that combines this like IMF money for reforms part, which was absent in the previous programs, and I think it is very important for us. So, and the good thing about this long term, it has this like long-term vision of Euro integration and additional investment. So we're looking for more programs towards that. And in Ukraine plan, you would see like the 6 sectors that are important. Plus, we add defense, because defense could not be part of this program. So what we're looking after, the industries that, or the sectors that we think economically are more viable is the defense, energy, of course, agriculture, IT, critical raw materials, the transport and logistics, and industry, green steel, and this whole green transition as a business course. So that's what we are focused in, to get investments in the country and to make business more resilient. The last thing I would probably say is about energy. So what is the answer to what Russia has been doing? It is to build new distributed, greener capacity. And it couldn't be done without private sector, without businesses, but it couldn't be done without the government and the donors. So we need to combine all of this, and the government on its part did a lot to ease, the connection to the grids, and will be doing more to ease the financing for these programs, but we'll be doing more, etc. So the businesses would be building a lot of this capacity to get us through the winter, this winter, next winter, whatever, and also together with municipalities and state-owned companies to be able to review quickly and stay resilient.
Thank you very much indeed for your remarks. I was wondering if I could ask a quick follow-up question on something that we hear about quite a lot in Washington, war insurance. Ukraine was a market for war insurance before the full-scale invasion. And since then, the market has failed because the risk is too high, at least the private market. There have been very substantial and impressive achievements on shipments and freight. A few achievements also covering long-term investments, but those have been much fewer. My impression is that it's still a little bit too difficult for the private market to cover war risk insurance, given the situation in Ukraine. International financial institutions are trying to fill in the gap, but I was wondering if you could update us on those efforts. You say FDI has improved, was quite good last year. My impression is that's mainly for firms that are already in Ukraine. Greenfield investment hasn't really picked up yet. So my impression is that long-term insurance, war insurance is key, and maybe you can give us some news on how things are going.
Well, there are two vectors on this. One, for example, you know about this French deal, right? That acquiring one of the telecom operators and then a big data, cable data operator, combining them. So, this is a deal of around $1 billion. Does it have a war risk insurance that everybody asks for? No. It has the vehicle that the French ETAs are providing on the French side, but it doesn't have war risk insurance. So, are these kinds of big investments in Ukraine possible right now? Definitely. Right? So then we sometimes feel that people use this war risk insurance as they're interested but not ready, and then they say, what about war risk insurance? Because if you go to MIGA and TFC and ask them, they say that they don't have such a big pipeline, right? So there's this aspect of that, meaning there's not enough demand. Also on this unity, right? So it was really successful on bringing the prices down on the insurance market almost immediately, several times over. But then the uptake for this insurance is also less than the capacity of the whole facility. Meaning that it is needed. At the same time, it is not the biggest drawback on investment for businesses from what we hear. So we also launched Ukrainian ECA, being able to insure some of the risks, and we're working with ECAs from all over the globe for them to ensure their investments of their companies in Ukraine. And we know this process is working, and there's going to be more of them. So that's probably status.
Thank you very much indeed. Maybe I can go to my co-author for just a few brief minutes on the energy situation. We've already heard from Ambassador Pyatt and from some of our panelists. The Russia's relentless attacks on Ukraine's energy grid have been very damaging, very costly, and unfortunately, it doesn't cost Russia that much to organize these attacks. Air defenses are obviously key. Hopefully, we'll hear some new announcements on bolstering Ukraine's air defenses soon. But could you give us just a picture of just how much has been destroyed and how much it's costing Ukraine?
Thanks, Charles. The final measurements are still coming in. At the very least, we've seen measurements between 8 to 9 and over gigawatts of lost capacity. Now, it is not just lost capacity that's worrying, but it's also the ability and the support for the overall system, the balancing that needs to happen on the transmission network as well. So all of that is interconnected, of course. We're anticipating tremendous number of rolling blackouts this summer, and also one of the toughest winters. It is extremely heartbreaking to see Ukraine having recovered several gigawatts through the last several years of power through, as was mentioned by Ambassador Pyatt and other speakers and deputy ministers, through tremendous sacrifices by the energy employees, through the generous donations from all across the world, anything from financial support to direct, getting massive equipment to Ukraine. I mean, the logistics of that are extremely complex, and making sure that it's going to the right places, to the right cities, and that the systems are properly integrated. Just the level of coordination that takes cannot be underestimated. So this is a serious problem, but in the same way, it is also accelerating the need and how quickly decentralization of the generation will have to happen in Ukraine. This was mentioned by Alexei and others, just the complexity of going through and changing the system from a centralized, massive, larger power plants to decentralized it's a huge undertaking even for a system in a peaceful time. If we were to do that to a U.S. community or to a community somewhere in Europe, it is a huge undertaking in Ukraine in the midst of this horrific war. It is extremely challenging, but we have seen what Ukrainian people, with support of the donors, can achieve. So I would say that it's not impossible. However, keeping in mind the coordination between IFIs, coordination between private sector, coordination between local communities, but also just even the technical support that will entail, just the capacity building, and then the actual kind of on the ground updating the systems and connections and everything that it takes to create that decentralized system. That's a huge and massive undertaking. It's absolutely feasible, but it must start now. And I think that's something that we reinforce. We absolutely cannot wait for this to start in a year, 2 years, 3 years. These efforts need to start now.
Thank you very much, Olga. I'd point everyone to some of the diagrams in our report. We're very proud, especially of one diagram, though the subject is sad, of course, which shows you just how much has been destroyed. Obviously, Ukraine has access to energy resources to the west, but importing that energy is very costly. A little bit of housekeeping for those of you who are watching us here in the studio and online. You can submit questions to us and to our wonderful panelists. You just need to go to askac.org. That's askac.org. Questions will appear here, and I will ask them to our panelists. So I'm going to bring in our final two panelists who've been very patient briefly, and then hopefully some questions. We already have one. That's very quick. So we'll bring in the final two panelists, then we'll go to the question. Ed, Verona, if I could go to you. Thank you for being so patient. Thank you for joining us. You have a long track record of helping U.S. businesses invest in the region, albeit in happier times. So I was wondering what you're picking up on before you go to Berlin. Which opportunities the private sector is seeing in Ukraine now to do with reconstruction and generally, and what you think needs to happen for them to actually go in. I think you're on mute.
The cardinal sin of webinars. It's muted.
Forgiven.
Thank you for inviting me, first of all, and it's been very interesting to listen to the other panelists. And I'm looking forward to Berlin and learning much more about what is being planned by various governments that have been that have invited the participants from various parts of Ukraine. I understand for all levels of government. To answer your question, look, my perspective will be from the private sector. Yes, I do have experience in the region. Most of that, as most will see from my bio, is from a country to the east of Ukraine. But I can see some parallels from the earlier period of transformation in Russia and what are some of the changes that have already taken place in Ukraine and hopefully will move in the direction, a more positive direction in the future. Any private company, particularly in the consumer goods sector, is going to look at some fundamentals, the size of the potential market. And I may be preaching to the choir here, telling you what you already know, but maybe to underscore it and to be a little more upbeat about things. Ukraine is a country with a population roughly the size of Canada, and it has an appetite for Western fast-moving consumer goods. It currently enjoys duty-free access to the European Union, which makes potentially a very interesting base for manufacturing. A very significant, relatively young labor force. Of course, at this current time, some of it's located outside the country. Some of it is on the front lines, but the potential is still there. And it's a country noted for its, particularly for its IT skills, which makes it, I think, a very interesting focus for investment in the artificial intelligence, remote services, and advanced engineering areas. And this, in perhaps an ironic sense, the war will create opportunities for foreign companies that want to participate in reconstruction. And those companies may then see opportunities beyond that initial reconstruction period. And as Ambassador Pyatt noted, the destruction that has been wrought will have some, let's say, silver lining in that it creates the opportunity to rebuild to entirely new standards and to create a new and more competitive economy with a distributed power generating system that will be greener, we all hope. So what will it take to convince investors to go there? Well, first and foremost, and most obviously, a resolution of the conflict. It's much too soon to be talking about investing in long-term consumer-focused activities or establishing a base for remote servicing when, as Denis will know, you don't even have reliable access to internet connections. So that's sort of a precondition for companies to even begin, I think, doing exploratory steps for investment. But in a longer term perspective, a stable and predictable investment climate down the road, and what has already been said by Olga and Alexei underscores that is happening. Rule of law, and by that I mean the creation of commercial courts with qualified jurists and strong measures against corruption and administrative abuses. And I know that a lot has been done in that area. And sometimes because a lot is being done, it gets more publicity and may be perceived by some as evidence that that there is much corruption. But I take it as a very welcome sign when I hear about efforts the government has made to crack down on it. And again, to underscore what the previous speakers have said, the EU accession process, I think, will exert strong pressure on the modernization of the legal system, will bring judicial procedures into closer conformity to international norms and practice. And this itself will provide, I think, assurance to many potential investors. And as Alexei mentioned, the help from international financial institutions will be critical. Not the least of which would be war insurance or political risk insurance. So that's I can maybe cite one thing that the U.S. government, I think, might be able to do, and that is to begin considering something for Ukraine similar to what was done with the Africa Growth and Opportunity Act, and that was adopted in 2015. It comes up for periodic renewal, and it has some conditionalities, which include progress toward establishing market-based economies, the rule of law, political pluralism, and also eliminating barriers to U.S. trade and investment, policies to reduce poverty, combat corruption, and protect human rights. But what it grants is access, duty-free access to the U.S. market, which could be a very significant component in bringing in U.S. companies. So it's something to talk about. Or maybe simply a bilateral investment treaty, as we've had with other countries. Maybe a free trade agreement, although free trade is something of an epithet on Capitol Hill nowadays. Even administrations or individuals that used to be proponents of free trade agreements no longer seem to be. And finally, I'm reminded, since we'll be going to Berlin, something that the post-war Minister for Economic Affairs in Germany, Ludwig Erhard, I believe said, I'm trying to find the exact source, but when he was asked what would help Germany in its reconstruction after the war, and he said, well, it would help to have about 50 kilometers of shared border with the United States. And I don't think that was an imperialist aspiration, but that access to the U.S. market could be a very big driver of economic growth.
Thank you very much indeed. The U.S., to give it credit, has lifted the 232 quotas on steel and aluminium that Ukraine was under, like many U.S. allies. Some are actually quite jealous that I think Ukraine is one of the only countries that's received this favor from Ambassador Tai, who was here earlier this week. So some things have been done by the US for market access, but obviously more can be done. Just a slightly cheeky remark, but on the quality of internet connections, it's pretty much the same as far as we can see from our Ukrainian participants and you in Mexico, Ed. So as far as I can tell, the internet connections in Ukraine are working just fine. So very briefly to Denise, thank you for your patience, Denise. If you could pick up on some of the things Ed was saying to do with interest of international businesses, and then we'll go straight to questions. I see 3. I'd like to see more, please. So askac.org for your questions. Over to you, Denise.
Charlie, Olga, thank you for the invitation. It's a privilege, and I appreciate the opportunity. So I would like to focus on 4 crucial things that are important not only for Ukraine, but for the citizens, for international partners, the investors, and everybody. It is the robust air defense for Ukraine. It is energy. It is the workforce that nobody mentioned about. And of course, this is clarity, transparency, and fair rules for everybody. Not for the list attached that it usually happens, but for everybody. I would like to start first and foremost with the air defense systems. There is a lack of air defense systems here in Ukraine. So that's why, as a result of that, we have a huge problem with electricity, and it affects everybody, not only simple citizens that are preparing food at homes, doing their homeworks or something like that, but also affects businesses, huge businesses that are doing and producing something for the Ukrainian army, for the armed forces, and other businesses as well. So, of course, as Olga and Alexei already and everybody, you mentioned, guys, about the energy as well. So energy, once again, it affects everybody as well. So as Olga rightfully mentioned, we lost 8 megawatts of electricity. This is the volume bigger than the biggest nuclear power station in Ukraine, Zaporizhia. So this electricity would need to be produced from something, or it needs to be bought from somewhere or from someone. This is a great challenge for Ukrainian businesses and for the Ukraine itself. So right now we have electricity outages, but let's see what we will have in days and weeks ahead as well. The workforce. Also, I would like to say about the workforce as well. So a lot of folks, a lot of decent folks, a lot of males, they have been called to the army. So right now, a lot of companies, whatever company it is, working in energy, in defense sector, in IT as well, they are all facing with one difficulty: the workforce. So a lot of folks were called to the army. Other folks, they just simply relocated to European Union. And once again, this is the challenge that future investors and future companies would be facing with. And of course, as was rightfully mentioned by Ambassador Pyatt as well, all businesses, not only in Ukraine, but international businesses, I'm talking about the big companies, huge companies, international companies, they are all expecting to hear in Berlin, after Berlin, where the money will come from. What are the budgets that we are talking about? How the companies can participate in rebuilding and reconstruction. what would be the rules, what would be the tenders, and what kind of engagement they can get here as well. So, and just to wrap up and just to summarize here, we are all looking forward to the Berlin conference next week. Of course, businesses, they are all expecting to hear some more concrete plan of action rather than the PR or some marketing material that will be broadcasted at the Ukraine Reconstruction Conference next week. And yeah, let's make it a great success.
Thank you very much, Denise. So we have some questions coming in. We still need more, so please do send them in, askac.org. I have a question for both Olga Zykova and Alexei on the sort of division of labor between your ministries, which we've already touched on. I'm merging two questions here in the interest of time. Division of labor between the funding of reconstruction, some of which still comes from the central budget, but ideally you want there to be international development loans funding it. So the finance part, which the finance ministry organizes, and the matching of this funding with projects, which is organized by the Ministry of Economy, but also by the Ministry of Infrastructure. The Dream Portal has a very important role in our report because it gave us a lot of our data. So how does the day-to-day work? And my impression is that more can still be done to match eligible projects with funding that is there. So if we could start with Olga Zykova, and then we'll go to Alexei.
Great question. I think that for that kind of question, we need yet another panel to have. Actually, I will start with the sequence of events. Despite the fact that I'm representing mainly the Ministry of Finance, here on governmental level, the sequence is very clear. First and foremost, we cover the social needs. So we make sure that the citizens receive all the needed. Secondly, we balance the budget so that to understand that we have enough internal resources towards the military campaign. And the third part of this exercise is actually the recovery. And I must say that, sometimes we hear that recovery should start now, no need to wait for some magic day when big reconstruction will start. Actually, we already started it, and we've been doing what we can, repairing what we can from scratch, or simply putting together the efforts to do things with our own budget since the start of the war. Here, international partners help a lot, not only with the funding. They help a lot in terms of understanding and matching the priorities with the available funding on their side. So actually, last year, we came up with the RDNA 2 report from the World Bank. And for everyone's understanding where we were in terms of the funding, almost $3.1 billion was provided by the internal Ukrainian resources from the state budget, while $4.1 billion was provided by the international partners. So altogether, it's a combination of efforts towards priority sectors on the reconstruction, like energy, housing, social infrastructure, transport. And these priorities remain the same for this year. And for this year, with the next report provided by the World Bank, RDNA 3, we have the total amount of 15.3 billion, and 5.5 out of this amount was already covered both by the state budget and the international support. But with regards to who does what and actually having this coordination in place, it took a while. So I must say that in comparison with 2022 and part of 2023, we are now by far more disciplined and coordinated with regards to working with the partners, working with IFIs with their particular mandates, and having a very, very clear vision what institution is involved in what particular sphere in particular project. We are keen on having all this together in a very transparent, accountable way, because every potential even mistake might cost a lot. But we see how the damages increase and the cost of these damages increase. We cannot leave people without giving them a helping hand. At the same time, we understand that the resources, not only on the Ukrainian side, but on the side of the international partners are also getting more and more limited. So this is why we are raising question of more active dialogue on the use of the proceeds of the Russian assets and the Russian assets themselves. But probably it's a part of the yet another topic. But here I would say that we are cooperating in a very close manner with core line ministries, with Ministry of Economy, Ministry of Infrastructure, actually those ministries which are decision-making policies members of the troubleshooting exercise with the recovery and reconstruction funding, which cannot be put aside. But again, getting back to this priority sequence, without having the salaries to teachers covered, we wouldn't be able to focus on reconstruction of schools. So here, I think that the efforts that are ongoing are good and we have particular results, but this coordination is to be proceeded with in a sophisticated manner because we are all keen on having new standards and having the principle of building back better in a very practical manner to be implemented. Probably I'll give floor to Alexei.
Yes, thank you for using a slogan we'll all recognize. When we were in Kyiv, we also heard the term or the expression strategic autonomy quite often. Ukraine can be a net contributor to European strategic autonomy, and it's good to hear the experts in Kyiv selling Ukraine in this way, in ways that European and US politicians and even the voters will understand. So we'd encourage you to consider to continue. So Alexei, over to you on this question of who does what on the reconstruction once the funding has been identified, how you match it with the right projects. Thank you.
Yeah, so I would just try to go, from this reconstruction narrative,
Yes,
because more towards resilience. Everybody understands what's crucial right now. For example, is energy, right? So is it reconstruction? Probably, but the main purpose of poverty is to make a country more resilient and to get through the war, and then we go to reconstruction. So basically, whatever we're doing right now is aimed at that. So then rebuilding houses. Why? Because people can find jobs, generate taxes, pay, and get back to Ukraine, build housing there for people to return, and then they work, they support the army, and that's how we do it. On the processes internally, so we have a reform of public investment management that we're doing together with the Ministry of Finance and the Ministry of Recovery. It's in the process, so that the procedures are changing right now, but it will all be much more transparent once this is over and much more organized, even though a lot has been done so far. So how it will gonna look like? There's going to be an investment council chaired by the Prime Minister that will assemble first time in this month, in June. And in this council, there will be a single project pipeline, a pipeline of the projects that is prioritized according to economic criteria that is also established in the Ukraine plan, for example. So we will have the priorities, and that's how we work with all the icons, all donors inside to understand which areas should get funding first, and second priority, etc., which is not funding. And that would also be, for example, prerequisite for Ukraine plan for Ukraine investment facility from EU finances. So basically, that single project pipeline would allow more donors to meet more funding. And I would also would like to use this opportunity to maybe echo whatever Edward was saying previously on the reforms. So also in coordination with the Ministry of Finance, we did this matrix of reform. So we analyzed all the commitments that Ukraine has, and Ukraine has a lot. So Ukraine has done a lot, and Ukraine has over 200 commitments for just this year, like indicators between, and we will do that because this is a part of our European integration, our IMF package, Ukraine facility package, etc. So And in these reforms, we understand that they are not enough. So just reform in Ukraine will not be enough. We need all the additional investments and we need access to markets. This is exactly what Edward was saying. So all this long-term commitments that Ukraine on one side commits to reforms and our partners on the other side commit to investments and to opening the markets, I think is the way to go, is the way to push forward. So Ukraine plan is good starting example. Thank you.
Thanks so much. I do encourage everyone watching to have a look at the Ukraine Plan website, also the DREAM portal. There are really very, very impressive instruments that people who are investors or just have goodwill and want to help Ukraine can have a look at to see what is being done at a very granular level. It's really very, very interesting and an example for other countries, I'd argue. We have a good few questions on the energy sector, which we'll come to in a second. First, a more general question for our other two panelists, Ed and Denis. If we can drill down into a few more sectors that you think have potential in Ukraine, but we'll come back to energy, which has potential, but also has a lot of need for unfortunate reasons. So perhaps some of the sectors that we haven't mentioned yet, where you sense a lot of interest and a lot of potential. Denis first.
Yeah, thank you, Charlie. It was briefly mentioned by Alexei. I would like to say that the focus of investment shift from the IT industry to defense. So Ukraine became the most innovative defense testing field for the newest defense cutting edge technologies here. So since February 2024, Ukrainian companies, they have invented robotic systems, AI-driven unmanned aerial vehicles as well. So the artificial intelligence that Alexei mentioned as well, it has been used all over the place, starting from the battlefield to even at the Ukrenergo, as far as I know. So IT, being the most innovative business before the full-scale invasion, is now on the position number 2 or 3. Today, defense not only the most attractive area where people would like to do business, but this is also the advantages of investing in the future of Ukraine, because the technologies that has been tested here in Ukraine, they will be #1 demand for the export as well, all over the place and all over the world.
Thank you very much. So over to you, Ed, and a leading question. I know you have a background in extractive industries, so might there be some opportunities in Ukraine in that sector?
Absolutely. Maybe to point to just a couple of them. Critical raw materials was mentioned already. Ukraine has a significant mineral resource base. It is a producer of roughly 8% of the titanium ore produced in the world, and 4.4% of titanium sponge, a precursor to making advanced components for the aerospace industry. And what makes that particularly interesting is that until recently, or until the massive invasion of Ukraine by Russia, most of the titanium used by major airframe manufacturers came from Russia. So Ukraine has the opportunity to step in and fill that gap, at least partially. It also is a producer of many different mineral commodities, but I'll mention a couple of them because they're so important, again, critical raw materials, and so important for the IT and IA sectors. And that is gallium, niobium, germanium, and other rare earths. Ilmenite, it's a significant producer of graphite. All of these, graphite particularly important for battery production. It has significant potential for lithium development. Some may recall that not long ago, China restricted the export of gallium and germanium as a reprisal for, I can't recall precisely what was done to them, but that is a significant bottleneck for production of, I believe, touch screens on telephones. So I'd say that's an area where there is a lot of opportunity.
Thank you very much indeed. So I promised an energy question. I'm merging several here. We'll start perhaps with you, Olga Hakova. What is the projected rate of energy sector production growth in Ukraine for the near future? And also, several panelists mentioned the need for decentralized production given the threat from Russia. But are there any examples of countries or regions who've done this successfully, going from a central system to a more distributed system?
So let's start with the growth question. First of all, again, focusing on getting the capacity Ukraine needs to support basic needs in Ukraine, support access to electricity, especially heating services, and just making sure that the industry can continue operating safely and can continue contributing to the economy. In terms of the growth potential, we talked about this quite a bit. The other panelists mentioned the opportunities. First of all, getting Russia out of Zaporizhia is a #1 priority for international community, and pressuring Russia to leave nuclear power plant. That is, an accident waiting to happen if Russia continues to occupy illegally that territory. At the same time, we're already seeing developments in clean energy, installations of heat pumps. We're seeing mobile power plants and offers for those to be delivered across Ukraine. But we need to be realistic about what's needed in the short term, and making sure that Ukraine's households can have their lights on in the summer and going into this horrific winter that's anticipated. And then, of course, we can go into the discussion around decentralization. And it's already happening. You and I visited Ukrenergo, and we saw this really fantastic plan for what the decentralization will actually look like. And again, massive, huge undertaking. We know Ukraine has potential, but being realistic and working with the international donor community to get scale, private sector will need to be involved. Of course, IFIs and other donor institutions have a huge role to play to support Ukraine, especially in the near term. But to get that scale of projects, you will need massive private sector investments. And when we talked to companies and we asked them what they're looking for in Ukraine, it's making sure that their assets are safe, making sure that the risk of seizure is zero in Ukraine, making sure that the rule of law, all of that, the judicial system exists. And Ukraine, our wonderful panelists have mentioned the progress that has been made across these sectors. But again, making sure that Ukraine is talking about how those reforms are being made, communicating that and advertising the progress, but also being realistic about some of the issues that are still remaining, because these companies talk to each other. And if there is even one example of some companies' assets being seized in an illegal way, that's going to really turn off a lot of other companies in interest. So just being really careful about the story that Ukraine has to tell. And I think, frankly, just saying, corruption is still an issue, I think that's a lazy statement. I think it's really important to recognize the progress that has been made, not just in the last couple of years, but in the last several decades towards making sure that the energy sector is a place where companies can invest today, not tomorrow.
Thanks very much. So all our panelists are very special, but I'm particularly grateful to the two deputy ministers for spending so much time with us, more than I anticipated you'd have, to be honest. And I do want to make sure that you can get back to running the country when you need to. But maybe, given we only have 6 minutes left, I'll give both of you the chance to make any remarks in conclusion, starting with Alexei.
Yeah, thank you very much. Well, the remark would be, we'll say that the wartime is not an embarkable investment, so we need that. But we also think that this is a big opportunity, and as we discussed, in the critical materials, for example, and in all the other sectors, in defense, IT, energy, agriculture. So, and what the government is doing, so the reforms are coming, they are being implemented, and no way around them. And what the EU is doing, what the US is doing, all the other partners doing, both the help is coming and also the momentum is building up. So I still think that Ukraine has shown and proved itself very resilient without the war. So yeah, this is just an episode. Like Russia can damage the energy, we're gonna rebuild it. No questions here. And at the end, so like we start maybe find something expertise or start considering some like joint project in Ukraine, so we can scale later this year, next year, or years after. to make Ukraine a successful country.
Thank you. Olga Zykova.
Thanks. I would like to echo what Alexei said, and actually to make a few points. I think they are important, and they are covering whatever is being discussed with devotion to Ukraine. First and foremost, we've seen that the Russian war and aggression against Ukraine actually fostered positive changes in the country. The cost is very high, and we, on everyday basis, remember what the cost is. This is why our efforts are strong as never, and we are being quite realistic and pragmatic with what we need to do in quite a short period of time, because time here is of essence. Secondly, definitely we are keen and very firm and committed on making these positive changes, on implementing reforms, especially first and foremost on the anti-corruption plight and on judicial reform. This is the core tier for all other reforms to take place, no matter what it is, whether it's public investment management or it is a healthcare sector reform. Rule of law is the core for everything, and we are working hard on that. I do agree that corruption has been historically deeply enrooted problem in Ukrainian history, and we are quite realistic in terms of not only acknowledging it, but also making steps towards breaking that obstacle and moving with the European Union path and Euro-Atlantic path. And thirdly, I must say that the commitment of implementing such amount and such scale of reforms is actually because of the fact we want Ukraine to be self-sustainable, and we want to be a fully fledged member of international community. And this is why we really need this current support to proceed so that we can have the means to continue those good things we already do. The international community support is huge, and we truly hope that we will do our best to show that first and foremost Ukraine is a reliable and transparent partner, and secondly that we can save our people's lives and to win this war. The question of reconstruction and recovery is first and foremost for the citizens, and all those measures that we've been discussing today are mainly devoted to the welfare of those people who live in Ukraine and the welfare of those people who will want to get back to Ukraine, who had to flee the country and to live abroad. So these are core points on my side.
Thank you very much for what I'd call the big picture remarks, very important as we come to the end of this event to mark the launch of our report, Olga. So thanks to all of our panelists. I thought I'd give you the chance to make any final remarks before we wrap up.
Thank you so much, Charles. I just want to reinforce that the energy sector will be a main engine for recovery for Ukraine, and it will be a main engine for providing meaningful, well-paying jobs to bring workforce back to Ukraine, but also provide jobs for those who are in Ukraine today, and especially the veteran community, making sure that they have options if they choose to go into this sector as well. But when we talk about Ukraine's potential of nuclear energy, clean energy resources, wind, solar, biomass, tremendous potential to reutilize and reimagine what the natural gas network will look like with the low carbon gases in it, but also homegrown indigenous natural gas production from Ukraine, utilizing the storage system as well, the natural gas storage system, which has been a success story as well. It's being done today without any war risk insurance. But it's all about, in this report, we really focus, what are those big, ambitious goals? What does that mean today for businesses, for other stakeholders who are interested? And I think what we saw when we visited Ukraine, it is so important to go in and actually visit and meet with people and see the incredible transformation that's happening, the resilience that's happening on the ground. You can watch a billion videos, you can read a bunch of reports, but being there and meeting with people and talking to people face to face, there's just nothing like it. And I think it's really important for CEOs or their board members to go and visit Ukraine. Of course, it's easy for us to say, go invest today, right now. But even if they were to start with just visits or just talking to the companies who are already there to say, what are your tips? How would I potentially think about entering the market? What are some, can I do a feasibility study now, even if a full out on the ground project is not possible? Can I do the study of what's feasible? Can I build out my network? Because that can also take months and years. So what kind of preliminary work can be done today? And there's absolutely opportunities to start now to make sure that Ukraine is set up for successful short-term and long-term prosperity.
Thanks, Olga. So you're absolutely right. I concur absolutely that people should visit Ukraine if they can, should start thinking about setting up feasibility studies. Shouldn't restrict themselves to reading a bunch of reports, but there is a very good report I can think of that they should read, which is the report we're launching today, Reconstructing Ukraine at War, The Journey to Prosperity Starts Now. That's a really good report. So on the train to Kyiv, make sure you do read it, or on the plane to Berlin, because many of us will be going to Berlin next week for the Ukraine Recovery Conference. I believe the German organizers have set up an app which can match people, so a bit like matching funding and projects, matching people who have similar interests and want to work on similar things in Ukraine. I encourage you to download this app. Olga and I will certainly be on it, but you can also meet each other, and that's been emailed to you if you're attending the conference, so have a look in your emails. So thanks very much to everyone who's been involved. Thank you to our panelists for your patience and for your remarks. Thank you, Olga, for being my co-author, and the fact we're still on speaking terms after all these months and many versions is really quite something and a testament to your patience. But thank you especially to the people you haven't seen today, Nicholas Pantazopoulos, who helped us with the graphs and the charts, Lizzie Bowen, who helped us with web design, all of the pubs team, all of the events team. We're really very grateful and very indebted to you. So see some of you in Berlin and see all of you sometime soon. Thank you.